Hum inside my heart a little while. Come closer with the honey of your song. Your dance is a code, is a pathway to what's given. I am learning how to listen.
Hello, friends, and thank you for tuning in today. We have a very special guest coming to chat with us, Natalie Rousseau. Natalie is a inspiration for me. I originally met her through taking one of her online courses, The Witch's Year, and since then have gotten to connect with her in various formats, and I'm just truly, truly inspired by who she is and what she offers. So it is an intense blessing to share all of her wisdom, well, parts of her wisdom, with you guys here today. Natalie is a somatic therapist and mindfulness teacher living on Salt Spring Island. She has been teaching since 2001, and her offerings are rooted in a reverence for the natural world, woven together with deep appreciation for the wisdom traditions that have inspired her practices. When she is not in the classroom or working with clients, you can find her dancing, exploring the relational realms, or playing with plants. So before we begin, may we all take some time to ground into this space and into ourselves. Let's begin by taking a deep inhale through the nose and exhale out the mouth. Thank you all so much. Let's begin. Okay, so thank you so much, Natalie, for being here today and joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's such an honor. You are definitely someone I look up to. So it's so great to have you here and to have you share your story a little bit more and to get to dig into your wealth of wisdom a bit deeper.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind.
Yeah. So to start out, I'd love to learn more about you. What's your story? How did you end up being here where you are?
Wow. It's such a big question, and I don't know where to start. Like, um, I would say I don't really remember a time in my life when I wasn't a seeker, when I wasn't looking for cosmic breadcrumbs and tools and uh, clues. I'm an incredibly curious person. I think that curiosity is one of the greatest gifts that I've been given, because it's really, yeah, it's guided me and supported me through some really dark moments and challenging experiences in life. And even when I was really, really young, that curiosity was just so strong. And so, if you mean by how did I get here, as in like doing the particular work I do, having the fascinations I have, like doing the type of studies that I do. Yeah, I think it started when I was really, really young. I just always have been interested in learning. And in particular, I've always had an interest in both health and wellness and the mystery, the great mystery. So I'm, I have a Scorpio sun for people who like astrology, they like this. And so I've always been incredibly drawn to the esoteric. And I have a Gemini moon, which is just that like wanting to learn, wanting to learn and wanting to share. So I never would have thought when I was younger that I would have been a teacher, because I was really shy through a good period of my youth. But as soon as I started teaching, I knew that I was like, oh, right, of course, that's exactly who I'm supposed to be. So I think, yeah, these qualities of curiosity, um, and liking to talk. Like, I love this. I love conversations. That's how I learn. I learn from listening to others and from sharing with others and hearing myself articulate things. So there's my short and kind of broad answer to that question.
Well, thank you so much for that. Um, I love that, the seeker of cosmic breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
I love that quote. I wrote it down and will be quoting you in the future. So thank you for sharing that. And so you said that you are a teacher now. So I know that you teach yoga. I actually got to take your Witches Year course, which is, I think, how I originally found out about who you are. Well, a
Mhm.
small glimpse of who you are through that course, and then found out that you are connected with a lot of people that I know here in the Kootenays, which is beautiful. But so what exactly is it that your main offering or your main calling is now?
Yeah, it's been evolving. So for about 20, 23 years, yoga was my main offering. And my life was simpler than in many ways, because people would say, "What do you do?" I'm like, "I'm a yoga teacher." I started teaching yoga and meditation around the same time, in the early 2000s, and that was just my passion. I was an extremely passionate student of yoga, an extremely passionate teacher of yoga, and that was my full-time career for a couple decades. And I think I really didn't think I would ever stop teaching yoga. And so it was surprising when, around 2015, 2016, I actually found myself beginning this process of like slowly pulling back from teaching yoga. And so for various reasons, like my life just started to take me in other directions, other curiosities became really strong, other sort of, yeah, let's just put it that way, other fascinations really took hold in me. I think for me, there was also like a growing disillusionment with yoga culture, the larger yoga culture. And so I slowly started to unwind from that. And to this day, I teach meditation. That's still one of the core things that I teach. And I think I will likely teach meditation, until the day I die. And I still work as a yoga teacher trainer in various small schools throughout BC. I'm always really honored to go teach in programs that are run by people that I have a lot of respect for. But I don't really teach the movement practice on a regular basis anymore. And so the other teaching that I do is related to that program that you took with me, the Witches Year. So I have a couple programs. This is where I struggle, because I don't always know how to describe this other part of my work that I do, because I have these programs. I call them like living ritual programs, because they're rooted in this idea of creating a life of ritual that is rooted in relationality. So relationship to the natural world, to the cosmos, to ourselves, to the great mystery. And so these programs include the Witches Year, which you took. I also have a program called Stars and Seasons, a program called Moon Magic. And so all three of them are looking at, mapping cycles and seasons through a different lens. So the Witches Year, we're looking at the year, breaking it into 5 major seasons that are based on the old Irish calendar of sacred days. And so it's focusing on seasonal magic. And there's a bit more of a focus in that program and looking at the traditions of pre-Christian Europe. And then in the Stars and Seasons program, we're looking at the wheel of the year through an astrological lens. And so we work with plants and the tarot and astrology, one astrological season at a time. And in the Moon Magic program, we work with the lunar cycle. And so all three of them are like sister programs. They can, they're meant to all be taken kind of to complete the whole conversation. And those programs represent, again, fascinations that I've had since I was a child. So I've been interested in herbalism, in tarot, in astrology, and in earth-based wisdom traditions, earth-based spirituality since I was really, really young. Because I was very lucky that I grew up with a mother that really encouraged those fascinations in me. So that's another kind of teaching that I do. And I don't know if teaching's the word. It's kind of like facilitation. Like I feel my role there is to share my enthusiasm for these topics with others and try to encourage other people to develop their own enthusiasm for those topics, and to take what I'm sharing and then use it as a way, again, of tracking and mapping themselves in relationship to these changing rhythms and cycles, and allowing that to reveal to them their own understanding of themselves and of the greater world. So that's really fun. I love that work. I love it so much. And then the other teaching that I do, which is related to my work in mindfulness and definitely related to my long career in teaching yoga, is educating people about their about embodiment practices through the lens of the nervous system. And that sort of teaching is meant to support people in understanding how the nervous system works and how to strengthen, nourish, and fortify the nervous system so that they can have greater self-awareness and a greater sense of inner resilience. And that work is also related to the primary work that I'm doing these days, which is my work as a relational somatic therapist. So that's sort of the shift that I made, that I've been making over the last number of years, going from teaching yoga full-time to working as a counselor.
Amazing. Thank you so much for explaining what it is that you're bringing forth. And yeah, you're such a potent channel. There's so much that's coming through you. So thank you for saying yes to all of that and for holding all of that and offering it back to the world. There was something you brought up that I would love to hear you talk more about. This idea of yoga disillusionment. So I myself, working in the yoga industry, if we can call it that, it's been tough. I consider myself more of a grounded person, and being with those ethereal people and the fact that yoga is now becoming a business, right? And that people are using it for marketing and saying yoga will fix you and all these different things. And so for me, I feel like I'm also going through a bit of that right now of, whoa, what does yoga actually mean for me? And how can I offer it in a way that's supporting my own values? And so I'd love to hear more from you in regards to that, as well as what was that dismantling for you?
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate you sharing your own questioning. And I just think that is fruitful. It's so important that yoga teachers are asking those questions continually. What does yoga mean to me? What does yoga mean to me now? What is my intention in sharing it with others? I think that examination is so valuable. And it's ongoing, because you're changing. Ideally, you're changing. If you're sincerely practicing yoga, your practice is working on you, and you're changing and growing and evolving. And then, of course, the world and the culture of yoga is going through its own process of growth and evolution, for better or for worse. And so, just always checking in, like, where do I fit into this conversation? That's really important. So yeah, I mean, for me, and I think every person's experience with this is very individual, but what can I say for me? For me, like, I came to yoga as a young woman who had a lot of pain and suffering. I have, I live with the impacts of significant developmental trauma. I came to yoga with dealing with the impacts of very serious sexual trauma. And I was in a place of great grief at the time when yoga and I intersected. And I didn't have a real understanding of yoga. I'd heard about it, of course, and I got given a book about yoga when I was pregnant. But I was like, this sounds great, but I don't know how to learn something from a book like this, right? I'm a very experiential learner in that way. When it comes to physical practice, I can't learn it from a book. But when I experienced my first class, it was literally like this love it first experience kind of thing for me. It was so profound because I went into that class full of contraction and suffering and pain, and self-loathing, and just had this incredible somatic experience that when I went through so many different emotions and sensations in that first class that I took. And when I walked out, this feeling that whatever we had done, it had created a little bit of space within me, like a little bit of space in between me and my relationship to my suffering. And I was like, I don't know what this magic is, but I want to do more of it. And I just threw myself into it, like all in, like every cell of my being, all the way in. And so for me, the practice was always like, I practiced to save my life. And that's really what I was doing. I would joke all the time, like, it's cheaper than therapy. It ended up not being cheaper than therapy because I invested a lot into my yoga education, but it was like hitting two things at the same time. I was getting an education and I was having wonderful experiences, and it was a form of therapy for me, and a type of therapy that was accessible to me at that time. I needed something that was that somatic, and also that it had this spiritual component. I was very, very interested in the philosophical teachings of yoga, as well as the practices themselves. And so that carried me for a really, really long time. And I am so grateful for all the incredible teachers I studied with that really nurtured my interests, my passions. And but yeah, the culture of yoga changed a lot in the time, right? Because I began practicing in late 90s, and I really started pulling back from public teaching in 2015. I was starting to pull back, but 2016 is when I stopped teaching in public yoga studios. So in that time, a lot happened, actually. And the culture became very mainstream, to just like, whatever that word means. And that's a great thing, right? This great experiment to make yoga very accessible to many people, which is wonderful because it's a great medicine and it is so helpful to so many people. And I'm all for that. But in the aim to make it so accessible to so many people, there is a watering down of the discipline of the practice and of the teachings, and often a separating of the practice from the culture itself. And that felt harder and harder to navigate as I went on. And yeah, when you mix that with, capitalism, where yoga is being literally sold as a cure-all for things, and I never wanted to be in the wellness field in that way. I've always been interested in health and wellness, but I never wanted to be like, I'd get people sending me, I don't know what you even call this, when people are like trying to recruit you to sell their products, and they would recruit me as like a fitness instructor. I'm like, I am not a fitness instructor. Like, that is not what I do. And I'm not trying to promise people that I can heal them or save them at all. I want to introduce people to like a path of practice that hopefully they will nourish for their whole lives, so that they will get to know themselves and know the great mystery more. And so I just found like I didn't feel as aligned. If I was to Google yoga teacher, what would show up? I would not see myself reflected in that. And so there was that happening. And at the same time, a lineage that I was part of, blew up because of a big scandal, which was happening, seemed like everywhere I looked, it was happening, And so there was that too, like the disillusionment of these teachers that were, standing up on a stage, as it were, and really calling their students up to quite a high bar of behavior that they themselves were not upholding. And I don't have a lot of patience for that level, like that lack of authenticity, that hypocrisy. And so it leaves a sour feeling in you, right? Yeah, so for me personally, that was a lot of it. And I would say like the questions around cultural appropriation, which I want to be really clear is a really important conversation, always. Like I think that's an extremely, extremely important conversation. But again, some of the culture around the way that conversation was being held in these fields in which we operate, like social media, and also in classrooms, because I taught at large schools in Vancouver. It's not like I was being targeted or that I was getting any heat around that. I just was feeling increasingly uncomfortable with feeling like, and again, no one made me feel like this directly, but feeling like I needed to defend the fact that I was teaching this practice that I believed in deeply, because I had verified its efficacy for myself in my own being, and also through witnessing so many students over so many years. I felt like I needed to defend the fact that I had great respect and reverence for the culture from which the practices and technology and teachings come. And all of that just felt, so when you add all those things up together, it all started to just feel very tiring. And so I don't know, it was just a kind of fatigue that just made me want to return to the simplicity of the practice for myself. And there's grief in that, because I did spend a lot of time learning how to teach well. And I really enjoyed, I deeply, deeply enjoyed my career as a yoga teacher for those 20 years. Like, I loved it. I loved the experiences that I had in community, in classrooms all over the world. And I miss that. I still haven't quite replaced that in the same way. But over time, I've made peace with the fact that that is what was meant to happen for me, that opening my hands and kind of letting it go, so that something new could come in is what was meant to happen. But yeah, it's, the disillusionment is difficult. It's really hard, because, and I want to make it very clear to anyone listening, like, I believe 110% in the practices and teachings of yoga themselves, right? Like, I still have a sadhana, a yogic sadhana. I just am not teaching it. And I don't think that I ever will operate like as a yoga teacher again. And that does not mean that I will not teach embodiment practices, because I do still to this day. And I still teach meditation, but I just won't operate in the way that I used to.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's so hard when you've been living a certain way for such a amount of time to have that trust and surrender that
Mm-hmm.
the flow afterwards will still keep flowing, right? So thank you for sharing that, and for your courage and your vulnerability and opening up about the other things that brought you to your yoga practice. And through my teaching experience, I've met a lot of people who come for very similar reasons, and myself included, right? It was deep childhood wounds that I was holding in my body in a physical way, and found this practice that helped me to find that space, as you said, that bliss. And it was very potent for me. And so feeling the call, like, wow, I want to share this with everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm doing that, and I've been teaching for a decade now, and seeing, the other side of it and what is manifesting as well. And it's funny that you brought the scandals. I was actually in India when those scandals first came out, and it was intense being there and witnessing the unraveling that was occurring in some of those spaces, from the first ones that were first being exposed. And what I keep coming back to for myself and for my own practice or my own sadhana is that for me, yoga is a ritual. It's a ritual in taking care of myself. And when I take care of myself, I feel like I can be a more grounded human in my life and for the people that I love. And I really love that you have started to weave that into your offerings, that yoga might not be your main offering anymore, but you found this way, as you called the living rituals, for people to bring in other aspects as well. Because I've known from my own experience with yoga that in this Western world, we have a very heavy focus on asanas and on the physical aspect. But when we look at the actual practice, like you said, the unwatered down version of it, the very saturated version, there's so much more to it. And when I took the Witches Year program from you, I was blown away at how much you were able to encompass in that ritual aspect and inspire people on how we can bring in those rituals in our daily life through yoga, but then like and all of its facets, but then all the other things, like you said, herbalism, tarot, astrology, and that earth-based wisdom. So thank you for bringing that forth. And I would love to hear more from you as well on how you find that ritual aspect aligning with the yoga practice and how that has evolved and grown for yourself and then also for your offerings.
Yeah, I love I think it's one of my favorite words in the whole world, ritual. I think I'm so drawn to ritual and intentionality. And that is how I taught yoga. I would always say that in my classes and workshops and offerings, like, this is a ritual. I'm offering this to you as a ritual. You can choose to partake in it however you like, but just know that I'm sharing it as a ritual practice. And when we have, because humans are, it's a part of being human, right? As long as humans have walked on this earth with the consciousness that we have been drawn to ritual. It's how we make sense of our reality. It's how we anchor ourselves in the changing conditions of life. And so yoga, I before I came to yoga, I was very drawn to earth-based spirituality. So, I was like a young witch, and I dabbled in many different communities that practiced rituals of various type, but nothing ever felt like it worked for me until I found yoga. Yoga was like, okay, this is like a practice, a ritual I can do daily, that I can do for myself, and that makes sense. I really needed that somatic element to it. And that includes all of it, right? Like the chanting, the work with the breath, the coming to the same place at the same time of the day, like all these things are ritual. And so that just created this like body of ritual within me. And at the same time, ever since I was young, I've had these long-standing rituals of marking the seasons. And so, yoga just was another way of, I would weave those things together. I've always done that for as long as I can remember. And yeah, and so, sorry, your question again, like how ritual, like for me, the practice, the personal practice is ritual, but can you say the second part of your question again about how ritual now is part of what I do? Is that what it was?
Yeah, I would love to hear more on like how that ritualism has developed in your offerings and how you have woven the yoga aspect with the ritualism.
Right.
So yeah, that you have it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just look at ritual again as like anything that we do with intention on a somewhat like regular basis. And that doesn't need to mean every day, right? There are rituals that we might do yearly, that we do seasonally, that we do daily, that we do spontaneously, right? But that there is some sense of intentionality and care. That ritual is something that we bring our values to. It's something that we bring our hopes and desires to. It's a way of grounding ourselves, and it's also a way of opening ourselves up to something larger. So in everything that I do, I am always aiming to encourage people to create meaningful ritual in their lives, because I think ritual is one of the ways that we can make meaning. It's one of the tools that we can use to, again, help us to know ourselves and to be in an ongoing self-reflective process, which to me is like, that's what makes life interesting, right? Like if we're not in a self-reflective process, everyone has the right to choose how they want to live. But when we are able to live in some form of self-reflective process, then I find that is what helps us to have choice, right? If I'm aware of the way that I do things, and then I can choose, like, do I like to still do things in this way, or am I ready to do things differently? What do I want to bring in? What do I want to release? So self-reflection is necessary to be able to kind of guide our ship in that way. And even like, now in my work as a somatic therapist, it comes in because there's a ritual arc to the way that we work within a session. And the type of work that I do is rooted in mindfulness, right? Somatic therapy is very much rooted in embodied mindfulness. And for people to really get the most out of their sessions as a client, it really helps if they also can cultivate some ongoing practices for themselves that they're doing that help them build that self-awareness. And so even though when I'm working as a therapist, I'm not in a teaching role there is also that aspect of supporting clients in developing practices that will help them to gain insight outside of the sessions that we have and in their own lives, that they can really begin to do that process for themselves.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that that definition that you gave of ritualism is just doing something with an intention behind it. Because I think, especially in this well-being world or holistic medicine world, there's a lot of people who envision ritualism as this big ordeal, that it needs to be this massive uh, event that we put on, right? And I don't know if that, of course, there are moments like, where we are right now, we're coming up to the winter solstice. And so there is some beautiful winter solstice rituals we'll be doing to, align with the seasonal time. But I do believe, like you said, that it can be something that is more intentional and really just taking care of ourselves in a more intimate way. And
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So thank
Sorry,
you. Thank you. You inspired that.
I
So
didn't mean
thank
to
you.
interrupt you, but I do think sometimes as I agree, I really like to share ritual as something more intimate that one can do without making a big deal of it. Because I think in the West, in particular, we often associate ritual, like you said, with like ceremony or pageantry, or like that it has to be really sacred and holy and perfect. And that keeps people from just being creative and spontaneous and natural about developing personal rituals. And I think there is a place, I don't want to categorize these things too strictly because I don't believe they're easily put in boxes, but I think there's ceremony, which is often what we do, like gathering a number of people and making a bigger kind of event. And there's such an important place in life for ceremony. Ceremony is deeply important to all of us. And then there's ritual, which can also look similar to that, but it can be very, very simple, quiet, and other people might observe you doing it and not even recognize that you're engaging in some form of ritual. And to me, it's like the most highly creative and intimate personal act that we can do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, for me, like ritual is this very intimate place, and it is this opportunity to step into that flow state and really allow that creativity to come through us. So yeah, so thank you for again inspiring that and for bringing that forth. And with intention, um, there's a Sanskrit term, sankalpa, right? That is often talked about with that idea of intention. And I've heard it described in some more ethereal ways, like your heart's most inner desire or the seed that you wish to plant. And so I'd love to hear your take on sankalpa and how that weaves into the ritual aspect.
Yeah, I love that word, sankalpa. And, my definition based on, my understanding of the classical definition is like it's a vow or determination that is made deep in the heart. So it's not just something and this is not to trivialize goals or like simple material desires. Those things are also really important. It's how we get things done in the world, but it's not like a passing idea. A sankalpa is a really deep vow. So a vow is a commitment to something, and then it's also a determination, because the vow then requires that we are going to pull forth from deep inside of ourselves the will and determination to aim to align with that desire in every way that we can. So I think of sankalpa as something that is really far reaching. And I don't think it's something that we can just know immediately. Like, I think a sankalpa is often something that is revealed through time. And then we can kind of look back and realize, oh, my heart or my soul has always been aiming in this direction, and I can now see it, and now I can name it. And when we get to that point in our lives where we can name it, then it really picks up steam and becomes even stronger. But I think it's because I know a lot of people, I've experienced this a lot, people having anxiety around, I don't know what my intention is, or what if it's the wrong intention? What if I get it wrong? I got to get it right. I'm like, just like, listen deeply, like bring a great curiosity to yourself, and your sankalpa will be revealed, and you will know it when you know it. And then, because when you say it, you will feel it with every cell of your being. Like when you hear something that's true, you just know it. But it might take a while for some folks for that sankalpa to be revealed.
Yeah, I find this a lot as well with students that come to class, right? They want the answers right now and it needs to happen right now. And then they're like, "Oh no, but what if I chose the wrong one? What if it changes over time?" They always ask that question. What if it changes over time? Like that's perfect. Hopefully
Yeah.
that is what happens, right? Is because we want to be growing and evolving and uncovering what our real truth is. And so if it's changing, that I to me that shows that you're on the right path.
I agree. I think of changing it, like it should ideally get more and more refined.
Mm.
It's not like that.
Mhm.
It might, and that's why the Sankalpa is something bigger. It's not like tied to specific external circumstances. It's something that can continue to guide you even as external circumstances change.
Thank you so much for that. I often describe Sankalpa as the way that we orient ourselves. So I really love that that's what you brought forth as well.
I love that. Yeah.
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 So I'd love to hear as well, we're talking about Sankalpa and you're talking about listening and this orientation to guide yourself.
Hmm.
What were there any like aha moments for you on your path to recognizing what your direction was and help guide you forward?
So many. I feel like I'm continually having them, right? So many. There's been so many aha moments, and they come in various forms, right? Like I've had aha moments that were like, great, bright moments of revelation and insight. And again, a big part of like refining my sankalpa has been going through the difficult moments like that. For example, with my path as a student and teacher of yoga, going through that time of disillusionment, and then actually realizing that like it I was, whether I wanted to or not, opening my hands and letting all that I had worked so hard to develop, like kind of letting it go and knowing that it wasn't like it was happening. There was a lot of fear and grief and confusion and disorientation. But that also was part of what helped me further refine my sankalpa. So it's an ongoing process. I feel like I've had too many moments to name, like the aha moments, but it's just like continually happening. But that's one thing I can say is that it is a process of that. The aha moments come through light and through dark.
Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that because I find specifically in the yogic world, we're constantly striving for sattva, for that sattvic quality, the light, the airiness, the balance, the harmony, and I believe exactly what you said as well, that we need that darkness, we need that time in the magical dark, that womb space to actually create space for other things to manifest. So yeah, so thank you so much for noting that. And I'd love to hear more about, oh, sorry.
No, yeah, I said, like
Oh,
so, so, and I think if I would add to that, just that I think that's the hardest part for most of us in the modern world is that the part of, excuse me, the creative cycle that we're the least familiar with because it's not reflected in our modern understanding of the world and in this capitalist reality is the fallow periods, and the liminal spaces in between something ending and something new beginning. That is part of the creative cycle, but we are not taught that at all. And so when we find ourselves in those places of disillusionment or loss or the barren periods in between the creative rising of new energy, we often interpret that as we have failed, we have done something wrong, we're out of the flow of grace, instead of knowing that that this is part of it as well, and that there are fruits here, but they come in a very different form, and they require that those periods of our life require great patience, great trust, and great surrender. And in the surrender is not apathy. The surrender is softening into it while still remaining in a form of like active listening. So it's an active participation that is very receptive. So, and that's that I can only speak to all this because I've gone through those cycles many times. And also I want to name because of, my incredible teachers in the teachings of Tantra and Kashmir Shaivism that have helped me to understand this. But it wasn't only until I was really, truly introduced to that philosophical outlook that I really understood that this is part of the creative pulse of life, because I really wasn't learning that in the same way through other avenues of thought. So it's hard. I just want to say it's hard for anyone who's there. It's difficult, but once you've gone through a few of those cycles, you get better at it, even if they remain uncomfortable.
We only grow when we're in discomfort, right? That discomfort is the universe telling us that it's time to move.
Yeah.
I love to call that liminal space, as you called it, the quantum leap. And it
Mm-hmm.
can be so nerve-wracking in the free fall where you don't know where you're going to land. But it's so necessary, right, for us to be able to transition into the next chapter, or whatever that next version of ourselves is.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really loved how you brought up that idea of softening. That's something that has been a big lesson for me on my path, is that aspect of gentling myself and softening the edges, allowing the flow to flow and not
Mm-hmm.
being fighting the current as much. And for me, like earth-based wisdom and ritualism and herbalism and tarot and astrology and yoga have all allowed me to gain a bit more of goalposts for my orientation, right? And so that's exactly why I'm so excited to again have you on here and have you sharing your knowledge and wisdom and experience with all of that as well.
Yes to all that.
So I have another question for you that's been kind of brewing since we started talking, and it's around the role of a facilitator or of a teacher or a guide. And there's been a few things that have been brought up through our conversation, and just some things that I've been kind of dwelling on myself. And I'd love to hear from you about how you vision the role of the facilitator is, or the role of the guide or teacher, whatever it is that you want to call it. And how we can show up authentically as teachers while still maintain those boundaries of safety for ourselves and for teacher and for our students, and ensuring that, as you've noted, we're teaching when we're teaching yoga, we're specifically teaching a lineage that is not ours. In the idea that, I come from a Western, or from a European ancestry. And so how do we navigate that role, that aspect of appropriation, as you brought up as well, as teachers? I know that was a very large question, but I'm
Yeah, there's a
excited to
few
hear your
questions.
answer.
I'm going to try and parse it. I'm going to try it because I think there's actually a few questions. So first, I'd say I have sort of values that I bring to facilitation, but I don't have a set definition of how a facilitator should show up in all contexts, because I believe there are very different contexts in which we show up, right? So I have different ways in which I show up as a facilitator or a teacher, depending on, am I in a very formal teacher training environment where I am not the lead teacher, but I've come in as a guest speaker? Or is it, am I working with a small group of students that I've built an ongoing relationship with? I'm going to show up in a very different way in those spaces, so more I look at like the values that I bring in, right, of how I hold myself as a facilitator. So there's certain ethics and a certain quality of integrity that is really important. And as you said, authenticity. I think authenticity is huge. And I understand that when people are new to the role of guide or facilitator or teacher, it might feel difficult. Like we kind of borrow or adapt often like our teacher's way of being, and over time we find our true voice. And so just know that's part of the process. But over time, ideally, we are becoming more and more authentic as we show up in those spaces. Okay. Then there was the question around appropriation. One thing that I really love, I'm going to credit my friend and colleague Carmen Spaniola on this. She may have gotten this concept from one of her teachers, but this is where I first heard it, this idea of that we have bloodlines and we have milk lines. Bloodlines are our ancestry, right? So I am a person of mixed European ancestry, Gaelic and French primarily. But my milk lines, our milk lines are the wisdom traditions that we have drunk from, right? And so my lineage, I'm deeply rooted in the lineages of yoga, particularly the Hatha yoga and Tantra coming from the northern regions of India. And so it's very important to me that when I show up as a teacher, a European woman teaching yoga, that I locate myself. Right. So if I'm stepping into a classroom anywhere here where I live, right, I live in Western Canada. So most of the lands that I'm teaching on are within unceded territories. So the first thing is to, acknowledge whose land I'm on. The second thing is to acknowledge who I am, which is to name all the identities that I hold, including that of a European woman. And then to acknowledge my place within the lineage that I'm then going to share with others, right? That I am a student within a lineage that hails from the subcontinent of India. And that, to me, like, that is, what else can you do? Right? I personally do not hold the belief that people are not allowed to teach things that are outside of their birth heritage. Some people may hold that belief or opinion. That's fine. I do not hold that opinion, because that is not the way that the world has worked. That's how wisdom traditions pass on. When we look at Buddhism, Buddhism originated in the subcontinent of India and it spread throughout the world. Zen Buddhism is a very particular form of Buddhism from Japan that looks radically different than how it began in its birthplace of India, right? Tibetan Buddhism is very different than the type of Buddhism that is practiced in Thailand, but it's all Buddhism, right? And it's all honoring its roots, but it's also expressing the voice and the culture and the worldview and perspective of its new point of origin, right? Its new place in which it landed, in which it's seated. And so I believe that when someone comes to take a yoga class with me, they're coming to learn, to be introduced to the tradition. I do think it's my job to introduce students to the tradition of yoga so that they know where to go if they want to deepen their studies. But they're also coming to learn from me. So they want to understand where myself and my unique life experience and history intersects with the yoga tradition. And so it's important that I'm bringing forth, like, I've studied and practiced this for a long time now. What are the teachings? Here's the teachings of yoga, and what are my teachings? And make sure that I'm making those very clear, that my teachings, I'm not saying that my teachings are the teachings of yoga. Like, here's the teachings, and here's how I work with that, or here's how I interpret that, or here's how I live with that, and making sure that students are clear that those are separate things. But to me, that's what's of value. I want to learn from teachers that have steeped themselves in various traditions. And I always honor when I can get to learn from someone who, it's in their blood and their DNA stretching back for generations. That's powerful for sure. But I don't believe that those are the only people who can transmit a lineage with power. If someone is a very sincere student of anything, they can transmit that lineage with incredible power, as long as they recognize that that's all they are. They're just a humble channel for these teachings and technologies to be expressed through. I don't know if I answered all of your question, but I think I got those 2 points.
I really loaded it on you there, so thank you. That was amazing. And yeah, that answer was just so beautiful. I love that idea of the bloodlines and the milk lines. That really hits home with me, because yeah, I'm a European mutt, and I'm also a spiritual orphan because of that lineage, right? And what has happened in Europe, and then being dissociated from our traditional lands and being placed into a place that is on unceded territories, as you said. And so Um, for me, my bloodline is much different than my milk line, and I have gone to experience a wide range of different lineages that have really fed that part of myself that my bloodline was not able to do. And so thank you so much for that analogy and metaphor. It was just really beautiful. And something else that I really appreciate from you and your offerings, and again from that program that I took of yours, um, I love your ability for storytelling. And I think that that is such a beautiful aspect that you as a facilitator bring forth. And a lot of like potent teachers that I have experienced in my life, that's one of the archetypes that they're able to draw on. And that's the other aspect that I wanted to bring forth as well from your from that program and from what you just touched on as well is that idea of archetypes. And in what you had just presented, you said that when you introduce yourself, you present yourself in this idea of archetypes. And I would love to hear more from you on regarding storytelling and archetypes. And the reason why is because for myself, just to give you a little bit of an background information here, is I have a really hard time taking on archetypes. I have a really hard time saying, "Hey, my name's Danya. I'm a teacher." Even that in itself, that archetype of a teacher is something that kind of scares me. And so I'd love to hear more from you and your take on those aspects.
Okay. Again, I feel like this is like there's multiple levels to this question. I love it. So first, yes, I have a huge love of myth and story. And I think that's because, first of all, like we are just storytelling creatures. It's how we make sense of the world. But I also have the great fortune of being born to two parents who are like huge readers. My parents just consume read books, and I was taught to read at a very young age, and I had stories read to me, and so my life was shaped by story. And I always say that story saved my life because I was so steeped in story that when I was, because I left home when I was very young, and I found myself in many very difficult and dangerous situations, but I could locate myself in these great myths, and I could see my own situation through an archetypal lens, and it always gave me a greater sense of perspective. In my teaching work, yes, story is a huge part of what I do. I always loved the great myths and stories of European traditions, and through yoga, I was introduced to the incredible stories of the Hindu and Tantric traditions, and always wove those into my teachings. And it was amazing for me to see that the way my students, I always loved the philosophy of yoga, and some people were also keen for that, but not everyone. But they would put up with it because I would give them a good movement class, right? But then when I started weaving story in, everyone leaned forward, and I realized that it was the best vehicle for sharing the teachings because people can get it when it's shared in the form of story. So story is still a huge part of everything that I do, and I think storytelling. You said right before you hit record that you're really committed to making these audio because that art of listening, of like being in an oral kind of that the oral tradition is so deeply valuable, and it is something that we need to nurture in this world. In the same way, I think the art of listening and learning, but also of storytelling, of sharing and speaking, is so valuable. But then you brought up something other really fascinating idea, this idea of archetypes, and how you shared your own discomfort with taking on archetypes. Some people might call that like labels, like strongly held egoic labels, like teacher, mother, seeker, student, whatever, right? And I just think that's interesting. Like that's of course I'm going to say that, right? Like as a meditation teacher, I'm just like, that's fascinating. What a great fruit for contemplation. Did you notice like what that discomfort is? And I also like want to ask like more about your astrology. Like maybe like you're a more immutable person, and so you don't want to be pinned down to one or the other, right? So I just think archetypes in this way, they're always operating through us, and we do not hold just one identity. We do not have just one archetype that works through us. For myself, like I do hold that there are certain identities that I can say have remained true of me over much time. So storyteller is one of them, right? I'm a mother, right? That's an identity that I have, even if I, God forbid, lost my child, I would still be a mother for always, right? I'm a student. That's very much like an identity that I hold dear, and it's true over a long period of time. I will always be a student, right? I am a teacher, meaning I'm a person who likes to share. And then there are all types of other archetypes or identities that move through. For me, again, I find value in working with archetypes because they give me a broader sense of these facets of myself. But I think it's important too that we don't cling to them, that they don't become, as I said, these like strongly held egoic labels that our identity is pinned on, right? So that we will fall apart and crumble. For example, like when I was like, oh, I might not be a yoga teacher anymore, right? That was like, there's a process of unwinding that, right? But then it's like, okay, I might not be a yoga teacher in the way that I was, but I'll always be a teacher. And yoga will always be speaking through me in one way or another, because it will never not be part of me, even if I'm not in a classroom teaching people asana anymore. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, because archetypes are like such a big topic, but I think they can just be fun to explore, and they're very powerful. They're very, very powerful. So it is good to, what's the word I want to say, like scrutinize, contemplate, like be curious about which archetypes are operating through us and which archetypes we feel most aligned with, and which ones repel us or scare us, because those are also probably showing us some really valuable, there's probably some really good inquiry that can be done there about ourselves.
Yeah, thank you for that. I definitely know that for myself, like those archetypes are hard to bring on from some deeper wounds, some deeper trauma that I'm still holding on to, and I'm still unwinding that. And potentially that will allow me to step into that role one day. Um, and just for your awareness, my signs, I just did a reading with Leela, and she told me because I'm quite new to astrology, she told me I'm a Libra sun, a Pisces moon, and oh no, yeah, a Pisces moon and a Virgo rising. There we go. So
Yes,
there you go.
two strong mutable signs in your big three right there. So that
Yeah.
mutability, right? And then Libra just like is always like, well, I'm this, but I'm also that. So that's like a very mutable quality within you. So I can see how you're like, I'm not going to just be pinned down. I'm sure there's more complexity to your or like discomfort with archetypal titles, but that's one way that you can look at it, is through that astrological lens. That
Definitely. Yeah. And one archetype that I love, I don't know if it's an archetype that I take on, but one that I really love working with is the dark goddess. And when I took the witch's year with you, yeah, watch out. When I took the witch's year with you, I loved the dark seasons, the darker half of the year, and the different goddesses and the different archetypes that you brought forth through that. And one story that really, really stuck with me was the story of Persephone. It just changed my whole perception on who I could be, who I am, and the potential. So I'd love to hear more from you about Persephone and the dark goddess archetype, just because this is my personal fascination. So, do you have any wisdom you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I would say like the dark goddesses are so powerful for all those who walk kind of a feminine path in this lifetime, because there have the dark goddesses, as we call them, like the goddesses that have access to like the chthonic powers, like the underworld powers, the powers that are in the shadow, meaning like in the dark half of the lunar cycle or the dark half of the year. These are powers that have been oppressed for a very long time. These are powers that have been they have been presented with a very distorted view by the kind of institutions of religion that have held supremacy for the last few thousand years. So, getting to know the power of the dark goddesses, as they're often called, can be a powerful act of reclaiming for femme folk, for sure, in this world. And I think for masculine identifying folk as well too, because it's really important, I think, to understand the full spectrum of the feminine, because I think some masculine presenting folk might sometimes suffer under the idea that like The feminine is always generative, is always compassionate, is always kind, is always soft, is always forgiving, is always yielding, right? And then it can cause a lot of confusion when you meet the other faces of the goddess. So yeah, there's the dark goddesses are so powerful. Persephone, right? And what I love about Persephone, she kind of holds both, right? Because Persephone, her more ancient name is the Kore, which is like the maiden, the youth, right? And we often think of the maiden as like innocent again, and just like imprintable, and like, just there for the taking, doesn't really have much of her own voice or anything like that. So she's the goddess of spring, right? She's the goddess that arises with the first flowers of the spring. Say this is Persephone returning, and she's usually portrayed as like young and youthful maiden. But then she becomes as well, as she comes of age, she also becomes the queen of the underworld, which is fucking badass. Like serious title for a young maiden, right? And often the tale is told as the rape or the abduction of Persephone, and that's certainly an important way to look at the myth, as she is abducted by her uncle Hades. So you can read the myth in many ways, like, oh, it's a story of incest in a highly dysfunctional family. The Olympian gods are the original dysfunctional family, and she's stolen away from her mother, and her mother is distraught and has to bargain to get her out of the underworld, and then she's consigned to spending half her life in the underworld. Like, that's one way to look at that myth, and it's kind of dark. And I'm not saying that there's not value in looking at that way, because that's the thing. Myths are like, like a crystal. You can turn it in many different ways depending on how you want to look at it. But that's a very old myth. It predates the Hellenic Greeks, and it has its roots in the animist, agricultural, spiritual cults of that region of the world, of the Mediterranean. And this was the core myth of the yearly cycle of waxing and waning. This going down into the underworld for part of the year and then returning when the sun began to wax after the spring equinox again. And that myth is at the heart of the Eleusinian Mysteries, which was the longest standing mystery cult of Europe for over 2,000 years, and really created the foundation for Western culture. Deeply important. And again, this was a mystery cult, so we don't even know to this day the full extent of what happened, but it was an experiential initiation rite, a ritual that people took part in, and taking part in that ritual allowed people to broaden their perspective of what it meant to be alive, to be mortal in this world of mystery. And Persephone and her mother Demeter were the deities that taught these mysteries. And so the mysteries are encoded in this understanding that there is darkness and there is light, that there is life and there is death. There's a really beautiful chant that I love, and I put it in the category of like dangerous prayers. I mean that in a good way. Like, a dangerous prayer is a prayer that wakes you up. And it's the Zen night chant. And it goes like this. It says, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly and opportunity is lost. Do not squander your life. Let us awaken. Let us awaken. And at the heart of it, that's, I believe, a big part of what the Eleusinian Mysteries were about, right? That life is fleeting. And so it's, if you can, try to die before you die. Because if you can die before you die, then you can really live. And the dark goddesses teach us how to die before we die.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Natalie. That was so beautiful. And now I can understand why my infatuation with the dark goddesses is so deeply rooted.
Old. Yeah, it's old memories for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and for coming on here and sharing your wisdom. It's been such an honor getting to connect with you in a different method. And hearing all of the wisdom that parts of the wisdom that you carry, because I know that you have a lot more depth to you than what we got to witness and hear here. But thank you for sharing what you did.
Yeah, thank
Mhm.
you.
Thank you all so much for tuning in today. What an honor it was to have Natalie here sharing parts of her deep wisdom with all of us. If you would like to stay connected with Natalie, you can find her on her website, www.natalierousseau.com. Her name is spelled NatalieRoussesseau. Natalie Rousseau. You can also find her on Instagram, Natalie Rousseau 108. And you can also find her on Facebook, Natalie Rousseau Living Ritual. She offers many online courses that are partly pre-recorded, partly live, that take you through the entirety of the year, and I highly recommend them. As I said at the beginning, I took her Witch's Year course, and it is absolutely phenomenal. You can find other offerings of hers through her website and through her social media accounts. My name is Danya. I am the lead facilitator and founder of Wild Song Yoga. And it is a deep honor and a blessing to be here with all of you, getting to share these potent wisdom keepers. So thank you so much for tuning in. From my heart to yours, namaste. My name is Danya Buak. I am the lead facilitator and founder of Wild Song Yoga School. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for stepping into this space of learning and growing with these potent wisdom keepers. It is a deep honor and a deep blessing to be here curating and magically weaving all of this knowledge for you. So thank you so much. From my heart to each and every one of yours, namaste.